Chapter 3. 2 Letters and a Plan. The next day, Philip had a letter from Dinah. He showed it to the others. "Old Dinah's having a rough time," he said. "It's a good thing I leave here soon. It's better for her when I'm there." "Dear Phil," said Dinah in her letter, "aren't you ever coming back? Not that you're much good for anything except quarrelling with, but still, it's pretty lonely here with nobody but Uncle and Aunt and Joe, who's even more stranger than before. He told me yesterday not to go out at night down the cliff because there are things wandering about. He's quite mad. The only things wandering about besides me are the seabirds. There are thousands of them here this year. Don't, for goodness sake, bring any creatures home these holidays. You know I hate them. I shall die if you bring a bat again. And if you dare to try and train earwigs like you did last year, I'll throw a chair at your head. Aunt Polly is making me work awfully hard. We wash and scrub and clean all day. Goodness knows what for, because nobody ever comes. I shall be glad when it's time to go off to school again. When do you come back? I wish we could earn some money somehow. Aunt Polly is worrying herself to death because she can't pay some bill or other. And Uncle swears he hasn't got the money and wouldn't give it to her if he had. I suppose Mother wouldn't send more money if we asked her, but it's pretty awful to have her slaving as she does. Anyhow, tell me more about Freckles and Lucian. I like the sound of them. Your loving sister, Dinah. Dinah sounded rather fun, Jack thought, as he read the letter, and gave it back to Philip. "Here you are, Tufty," he said. "Dinah sounds lovely. Hello, there's Mr. Roy beckoning me. I'll see what he wants. More work, I suppose." By the same post had come a letter for Mr. Roy from the housekeeper who looked after Jack's uncle Geoffrey. It was short and to the point. Mr. Roy had read it with dismay and then called Jack in to show him the letter. Jack read it also filled with dismay. "Dear Mr. Roy," said the letter, "Mr. Trent has broken his leg and he doesn't want the children back these holidays. He wants to know if you will keep them with you, and he sends a cheque to cover the rest of the time. They can come back 2 days before school begins to help me sort out their clothes. Yours faithfully, Elspeth Miggles." "Oh, Mr. Roy," groaned Jack, who, much as he disliked his home, disliked the thought of staying on with Mr. Roy, and with the peevish Oliver, who was also staying on, even more than the thought of returning to his irritable uncle. "I don't see why Lucian and I can't go back. We shan't go near Uncle." Mr. Roy did not want Jack to stay on any more than the boy himself did. The thought of having that parrot for 1 day longer than he needed filled him with horror. He had never in his life disliked anything so much as he disliked Kiki. Rude boys he could deal with, and did, but rude parrots were beyond him. "Well," said Mr. Roy, pursing up his lips and looking at Kiki with dislike. "Well, I'm sure I don't want to keep you any longer, because it's a pure waste of your time to be here. You haven't learned a thing, but I don't see what else to do. It's quite plain that your uncle doesn't want you back. As you can see, he has sent quite a generous cheque to cover the rest of your stay here. But I had other plans. With only Oliver here, I intend to do a little visiting. I wish we could find some place for you to go, you and Lucian." Jack went back to his sister and to Philip, looking so dismayed that Lucian slipped her arm into his at once. "What is it? What's the matter?" "Uncle doesn't want us," said Jack, and explained about the letter. "And Mr. Roy doesn't want us here, so it looks as if nobody loves us at the moment, Lucian." The 3 children looked at one another, and then Philip had his brainwave. He clutched at Jack, almost knocking Kiki off her balance. "Jack, come back home with me. You and Lucian can come to Craggy Tops. Dinah would be thrilled. You could have a fine time with the seabirds. What about it?" Jack and Lucian stared in excitement and delight. Go to Craggy Tops? Live in an old, half-ruined house with a learned uncle, an impatient aunt, a strange handyman, and the sound of the sea all the time? Now that really would be thrilling. Jack sighed and shook his head. He knew that the plans of children seldom came to anything when grown-ups had to be consulted about them. It's no good, he said. Uncle Geoffrey would probably say no, and Mr. Roy would anyway, and your uncle and aunt would just hate to have extra children on their hands. They wouldn't, said Philip. You could give them the cheque that your Uncle Geoffrey sent to Mr. Roy, and I bet my aunt would be thrilled. It would pay it would pay that bill Dinah talked about in her letter. Oh, Philip, oh, Jack, do let's go to Craggy Tops, begged Lucy-Anne, her green eyes shining. I'd like it more than anything in the world. We'll be in the way here, Jack. If we stay on, you know we will, and I'm sure Mr. Roy will kill Kiki one day if she says any more rude things to him. Kiki gave a hideous screech and stuck her head hard into Jack's neck. It's all right, Kiki, said Jack. I won't let anyone hurt you. Lucy-Anne, honestly, it's no good asking Mr. Roy to see if we can go to Craggy Tops. He thinks it's his duty to have us here, and we'll have to stay. Well, let's go without asking him then, said Lucy-Anne recklessly. The boys stared at her without speaking. That was an idea. Go without asking. Well, why not? It would be all right if we all turned up at Craggy Tops together. Really it would, said Philip, though he was by no means certain that it would be all right at all. You see, once you were there, my uncle and aunt couldn't very well turn you out, and I could get Aunt Polly to telephone to Mr. Roy and explain things to him, and get him to send her the cheque your Uncle Geoffrey sent for you. Mr. Roy would be glad to think we had gone, said Lucy-Anne, thinking what fun it would be to know Dinah. Uncle Jeff wouldn't care anyhow. So let's, Jack, let's. All right, said Jack, giving way suddenly. We'll all go off together. When is your train, Tufty? We'll go down to the station saying that we'll see you off, and we'll hop into the carriage at the last minute and go with you. Ooh, said Lucy-Anne, thrilled. Where's your handkerchief? Said Kiki, sensing the excitement and rocking herself to and fro on shoulder. Nobody took any notice of her. Poor old Kiki, said the parrot sorrowfully. Poor old Kiki. Jack put up a hand and fondled the parrot, thinking out ways and means of escape. We could wheel my trunk and Lucy-Anne's down to the station the night before, when we take yours, he said. Nobody would notice ours were gone out of the loft. We could buy our tickets then too. Has anyone any money? The three of them put their money together. It would probably just buy the tickets. They simply must go off together. Now that they had made up their minds, it was quite unthinkable that anything should be allowed to prevent it. So they made their plans. The day before Philip was due to leave, his trunk was taken from the loft, and Jack managed to get his down unobserved too. He pushed it into a big cupboard in his room, and Lucy-Anne helped him pack it when no one was about. I'll wheel my trunk down to the station on the barrow, sir, said Philip to Mr. Roy. It was the custom to do this, and the master nodded, not taking much notice. He wished Jack and that parrot were going too. The boys managed to get both trunks onto the barrow without being seen, and set off to the station in great spirits. Escape seemed quite easy after all. Sam and Oliver did not seem to notice anything. Sam was too excited at leaving for home himself, and Oliver too miserable at the idea of being left behind to bother about anyone else. The next morning Philip said a polite goodbye to Mr. Roy. Thank you for all your help and coaching, sir, he said. I think I shall get on well next term now. Goodbye, sir. Goodbye, Philip. You've not done badly, said Mr. Roy. Philip shook hands with Mr. Roy, who drew back a little as a mouse ran out of the boy's sleeve. Philip tucked it back again. How can you have those creatures running about you like that? Said Mr. Roy, and sniffed loudly. "Where's your handkerchief?" said the parrot at once, and Mr. Roy glared at it. As usual, it was on Jack's shoulder. "Could I go down to the station with Lucian and see Philip off?" asked Jack. Kiki gave a squawk of laughter, and Jack gave her a little slap. "Be quiet! There's nothing to laugh at." "Naughty boy," said Kiki, just as if she knew what mischief was in Jack's mind. "Yes, you can go down and see Philip off," said Mr. Roy, thinking that it would be nice to get rid of the parrot for a little while. So the children went off together, grinning secretly at each other. Kiki had the last word with Mr. Roy. "Can't you shut the door?" she bawled. Mr. Roy gave an exasperated click and banged the door. He heard the parrot's cackle of laughter as the children went down the road. "If only I need never see that bird again," he thought to himself, little knowing that his wish was about to come true. Jack, Lucian, and Philip arrived at the station in plenty of time. They found their luggage and gave it to the porter to put on the train. When the engine steamed in, they found an when the engine steamed in, they found an empty carriage and got in. No one stopped them. No one guessed that two of the children were running away. They all felt thrilled and rather nervous. "I do hope your uncle and aunt won't send us back," said Jack, stroking Kiki to quieten her. She did not like the noise of the trains, and had already told one to stop whistling. An old lady looked as if she were about to get into their carriage, but when Kiki gave one of her appalling screeches, she thought again and hurried a good way up the train. At last the train moved off, with many snorts that caused the excited parrot to tell it to use its handkerchief, much to the children's amusement. It steamed out of the station, and in the distance the children saw the house where they had lived for the past few weeks, sitting at the bottom of the hill. "Well, we're off," said Philip, pleased, "and it was that perfectly easy for you to escape, wasn't it? Golly, what fun it will be to have you and Lucian at Craggy Tops. Dinah will be thrilled to bits when we arrive." "Off to Craggy Tops," sang Lucian. "Off to the sea and the wind and the waves. Off to Craggy Tops." Yes, off to Craggy Tops, and to a wild and astonishing time that not one of the children could possibly have imagined. Off to Craggy Tops, and off to adventure.